I'm Annette Sledd, and I'm from Marshall. You know, I've got some pretty simple charts with not a lot of words, so the risk in that is I may forget to say something that I want to. But on this cover chart, just have the facilities that at Marshall we're responsible for in support of the ISS Program Office, Rod Jones. On the top left is the Material Science Research Rack, and that supports the ESA Material Science Lab furnace. It also has the left side that's currently empty but scarred to support other payloads. Below it is the Microgravity Science Glove Box, a multi-use workbench, as Julie mentioned on the first day, that provides up to 2 levels of containment. And then on the upper right is the Window Observational Research Facility, which is just in April launched a station, is in the process of being fully outfitted and has been fully set up now and will be activated soon, but it facilitates optical quality Earth viewing research. And then the lower right is the Express Rack. We currently have 7 on orbit. The 8th one is planned for launch on the shuttle in November, and supports all types of disciplines. One rack is dedicated to supporting galley hardware for the crew, and we have freezers, small furnaces, centrifuge, EMCS from the European Space Agency, just a wide variety of payloads that can be accommodated by the Express racks. And there's a number of slots that are not currently utilized by payloads that are targeted for national lab payloads. And then in the center is the Express Logistics Carrier. We're in the process of transitioning into the payload integration management for the ELC, and we'll be playing a key role there like we do for Express and MSG and the other racks. Okay, next chart. What I wanted to show you here is the ground hardware that we do have at Marshall. This is, I think, actually a picture of the flight rack, but now that the the last flight rack is loaded in the logistics module for launch, we have the functional checkout unit that provides the same avionics as the flight rack. So starting on the lower left, once your payload comes into the program, work with a PIM, and you can get a common suitcase simulator. It used to be a piece of hardware, and then through process improvements, we basically developed a disk that can simulate the Express Rack Ethernet interface and support the payload developer and software development. And it will run on the payload developer laptop. It's the laptop or the computer, basically a standard computer or laptop. Also, as has been mentioned earlier, the Trek software can be obtained from the program and can support the ground command system that the payload developer will develop. So that is used at the payload developers. Those are both used at the payload developer sites through the development process. We're in the process of implementing a remote payload development test capability. We've used CGBA as a pathfinder, BioServe folks, as a pathfinder to actually test this out. But through this, a router can be sent to the payload developer, and then they can tie in remotely from their site to our facility at Marshall through the Express Rack and do some end-to-end testing so that when they actually come to test, have a high degree of confidence that the end-to-end communication process will work. And so those routers, we do have dedicated routers that have been bought and are in the process of being programmed for shipment later this year, in the next few months. Then, as Amanda said earlier this morning, we're in the process of implementing the lean integration payload processing. The payload can be shipped to Marshall, whether lean or a more complicated payload. If desired, off-gas testing, vibration testing, EMI, EMC testing, and acoustics testing can be provided at Marshall. That needs to be paid for separately, is not part of the program-provided test capability at this point. Cube Lab did come through Marshall, used our services for this testing, and then tested with our Express Rack before they flew. So then testing with whether you do the environmental testing or not at Marshall, the Express Rack test support is provided by the program. Through the lean integration process, a lot of the requirements can actually be verified through that testing. We have a lot of the PEI folks there that actually approve the verification co-located with us at Marshall. We have the ops folks, of course, so they can validate procedures. The cadre can become familiar with the payload. We actually have ops support that supports the payload testing as well, and can facilitate resolving any communications issues that there may be. The HFIT that Mike Miller discussed this morning, that group can come and evaluate the human factors requirements real time with the testing, and it's proved to be a very beneficial and efficient process. Not a lot of overhead. Work with the test engineer to make sure that he has the requirements and roll that into the test procedure. And then from there, we'll ship the payload to the launch site. It's the current plan. And the wharf payloads, for wharf, we have one ground rack that does not have any resources. It's located here at JSC in Building 9. It could be used for any fit checks or that sort of human factor evaluation, but the interfaces from the resource standpoint are identical to the Express Rack, so the Express Rack can be used to functionally check out any wharf payloads as well. Okay, next chart. And then for the microgravity science glove box, the payloads go through a similar process, and they have operated this way pretty much from day one for MSG, where the payload comes in, can do the optional environmental testing, and then we'll test and verify their requirements with the MSG. Of course, another beauty is the teams are all there, the projects are managed there, so they can help. The MSG PIMs are there to facilitate bringing the payload in. The labeling can be finalized with the payload when they come here, as well as the human factors, also the end-to-end data testing, and the ops familiarization and procedure validation. Additional MSG ground facilities, there's a little lower fidelity ground unit that's at Marshall as well. Can be used during development testing of course, with the MSG payloads, there's a lot of human factors involvement, and that's where this unit comes in handy. And all of our facilities have training units here at JSC in Building 5 that support the crew training activities. Okay, next chart. For the material science research rack, we also have a ground rack. You can see it in the upper picture, just to the left of the MSG. Right now, the MSL, as I mentioned, is the only payload in it. The MSL ground hardware is actually in Europe, but we use the rack for troubleshooting. If there was ever another payload, MSRR ground rack could be used to certify and verify any of those payload interfaces. We support troubleshooting with the ground rack for any on-orbit problems, and if necessary, MSL, if there was ever any complicated sustaining activities we needed to do to troubleshoot any on-orbit anomaly, we would have to work out a deal where MSL and the furnaces were possibly shipped back to Marshall. But this rack has been on orbit almost a year now and performed very well. And then our sustaining and ops teams, of course, are there as well to support that activity. Okay, next chart. And then, as I mentioned, the ELC activities that we're in the process of transitioning into, there's one ELC suitcase simulator currently developed, and it has been very much in demand by some of the payloads, and has recently been upgraded with the latest software simulations. We're also in the process of modifying a STEP suitcase test environment for payloads to allow development software support for the ELC payload. So that should be available later this year. So there will support the payload developers a little bit better. There's one functional equivalent unit that's in the payload software integration verification facility at Marshall, and Amanda Ross will probably say a little bit more about that in her next presentation. In fact, the STP-H3 payload was just at Marshall a couple of weeks ago and did some testing with it after using the suitcase simulator than the FEU as a higher fidelity item. And then there's the ELC simulator that's at KSC. Once all the ELCs are launched, the simulator will be utilized to check out and verify the payload interfaces. As I said, it's currently at KSC. We're in the process of seeing if this needs to be a portable unit, although it wasn't designed to be very portable, so that's an ongoing activity per the program office. And that will allow for the end-to-end testing, which has proven to be a very beneficial capability to ensure that once you get on orbit, you have the good communications flow. Okay, next chart. In development testing, a number of payloads have come to Marshall to do development testing. As I mentioned, with the router capability and the remote testing, that will give additional capabilities, but that simplifies things for the payload developer and is the most efficient use of everybody's time in the end when the final testing is done. And I think that's my last chart. Just some backup capability charts on the overall facilities, their capabilities, and of course the ops are performed for all of these facilities are performed at Marshall by the POIF folks. Are there any questions? Okay, thank you.